Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're thrilled to have you join us for this new episode of People and Science Live, streaming live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. I'm Francesca Brazzarotto, your host, and today we'll explore how biological factors, as well as social and environmental influences, shape the way we age, particularly in relation to brain health and Alzheimer's risk. As we're approaching the end of March, a month dedicated to celebrating International Women's Day and Women's History Month, it's the perfect time to reflect on how far we've come in understanding women's health, but also how much work still needs to be done. For too long, medical research has treated the white male body as the default, leaving gaps in knowledge about how diseases affect women differently and what unique health challenges we face, especially when it comes to brain health and aging. Today, we're focusing on the scientific side of this discussion. We'll explore how biological sex, along with social and environmental factors, influences brain aging and Alzheimer's risk. To ensure clarity, we'll use terms such as man and woman in reference to the biological aspect of sex as used in research. We recognize that sex and gender are distinct and that gender identity plays a crucial role in health and lived experiences. Our goal is to communicate research findings clearly while acknowledging the complexity of both sex and gender. We strive to approach this topic with inclusivity, respect, and scientific accuracy, and we appreciate your understanding. Now, our special guest today is Dr. Sivanya Subramanya Pillai, a researcher whose work sheds light on these crucial issues. She'll share insights into how these factors influence brain aging and how emerging research is shedding new light on women's specific health needs as they age. Hello, Sivanya, and welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, Francesca. Thanks for having me. So excited to be here.
Thank you. Shall we start by giving a bit of background information about you and what inspired you to look at brain aging and biological differences?
Absolutely. Yeah. I've always been very fascinated with human psychology. I think from a young age, I've always wondered why people behave the way that they do. And I think this curiosity led me to pursue a degree in neuroscience at the University of Toronto. And it was during this time that I became basically incredibly fascinated with the human brain. So this is a 3-pound organ that's responsible for so much of who we are, how we behave, our personalities. And so, I was just in awe and fascination by the brain. And this motivated me to pursue my PhD at McGill University. And this is where I focused on sex differences in brain health, with the idea that, individual differences and risk factors, lifestyle factors, they might all contribute to brain health and aging trajectories in different ways for different people.
That's great. I mean, these differences are there, but we're only kind of coming to discover them now for some reason. So historically, it seems like a lot of medical and brain health research has been conducted primarily on a very specific piece of the population, right? On white men, often overlooking the rest. So.
Yeah.
Especially women. So
Mhm.
have you experienced that in your research? And can you give us a little bit of more information about that?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Historically, there has been a focus on men, white men specifically, the male model of disease. And part of so the issue with this is that because of this sort of historical focus on male models, and this assumption or this erroneous assumption that whatever we're learning in men and in the male model, that applies to women. And as a result of this, women have suffered a lot of consequences and detriments to their health and brain health as a result of just applying whatever we learned in men and to women. So it's incredibly important to investigate sex differences. It's a topic of research that I'm focused on, and thankfully it's an active area of research right now. And so the reason why it's important to investigate sex differences is that there are sex differences in risk factors, in disease trajectories, and in how men and women, for example, may respond to treatment and to interventions. So it's incredibly important to investigate how men and women age differently and how their risk profiles may influence their disease trajectories in very different ways. In my case, my focus is on Alzheimer's disease prevention. And so this is a disease, it's a brain disorder, it's a neurodegenerative disorder that actually affects more women than men. And so it's incredibly important to investigate why there might be this sex difference in prevalence for Alzheimer's disease. Are risk factors, for example, working differently in men and women? Are there female unique experiences that may be influencing the disease trajectory, such as menopause or sex hormones? So these are really important factors to investigate, and we can't investigate that if we don't look at sex differences.
Absolutely, and oh my God, there's so much to unpack into in this answer, because first of all, I am kind of I don't like to say surprised. I'm a bit of a poll that women make half a percent, like half of the population, and it's 2025, and we're still just getting to know how things work. And about these differences, and I think it's something that is coming out also in popular culture, because I heard many podcasts talking about how men and women are different when it comes to training, for example, or how our body changes in time, and it's a total different world. So I'm really happy that this focus now is coming to women when it comes to this sort of studies. And in the event title, we're talking about also intersectionality, right? And I just wanted to ask you if you can just explain what this means in this instance, and how do factors like culture, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status intersect with biological sex to influence brain health outcomes.
Intersectionality is this idea that different aspects of our identity may interact in very complex ways to shape our experiences and shape our health outcomes. So it's important, as I mentioned, to investigate sex and gender, but it's not just sex and gender we should be investigating. We should be investigating race, we should be investigating socioeconomic status, disability status, all these components of what makes us who we are. In real life, we know that they all interact in very complex ways. And so we should be applying this, intuitive knowledge in our research as well. It is tough, when it comes to the actual research part, but I think it is something that we need to work towards, because we're not just, our sex, we're a multitude of component of identity dimensions. And so it's really important to embrace this complexity. And just to sort of go back to the example of Alzheimer's, I mentioned, for example, women are greater risk of greater prevalence of developing Alzheimer's, but actually Black women and Hispanic women are actually a greater risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So this is a very clear example of race intersecting with sex to influence brain health and disease risk.
Yeah, that's crazy. That even digging deeper, we can find even more data that can really should be out there for minorities as well to know and be aware of. And I think you mentioned in some other events in the past, I did a bit of stalking online, that you were using the UK data bank for brain imaging, and you said that 96% of it, or more or less, was based on you said white male, and only 4% or something was based for the other ethnicities that might be out there. And I lived in the UK a long time, and I know that 4% is not exactly the percentage of people from other places living in the UK. So
that's right. So 96% that are white Caucasians. That includes men and women, but you're absolutely right. That just leaves like 4% to represent the rest of the UK, the rest of the diverse ethnic population in the UK. And just to give some perspective, 20% of the UK population make up this diversity of people that aren't white Caucasian. So the UK Biobank, just for viewers who aren't familiar with, it is is one of the world's largest brain imaging data sets. So it has over 500,000 participants. It's such a massive and impressive effort and undertaking. We have so much data and demographic and health information about participants in the sample. So it's incredibly impressive on that one front. But the unfortunate thing is that it's not really representing the society in which the participants are being taken from. And so this is a very important consideration to make as we're making hopefully more intentional efforts to recruit more diverse participants in our studies.
Right. And have you seen that since you started working in research in this field? Have you seen an improvement when it comes to data sets and things like that? Or
I have, yeah. So right now I've focused specifically on the UK Biobank. I've focused a lot on UK based cohorts, and so the work that I've been focused on, unfortunately, I haven't seen that diversity. It is something that I hope to address in my future work. But I have been reading papers and studies that are making an active approach to try and make their cohorts more diverse. So there's one example, the Canadian Consortium of CCNA. I forget actually what the acronym stands for, but they are intentionally going to underrepresented communities and making the barrier to participation a lot lower, so that they're getting a more representative Canadian sample. And I think that's a really great effort that's being made to recruit more diverse participants. And so that's a really cool example that we see in research. And another thing, just from I personally, as a researcher, I don't collect data. I work with a lot of publicly available data sets, and so I'm kind of just working with what I already have. And so I think for researchers like myself, it's really important to collaborate with other researchers who are working with more diverse samples, and to see if we can find creative ways to combine cohorts and see if we can to see if we can address these questions of intersectionality, because we can't really investigate that if we don't have variability in our sample.
Absolutely. And I think this is something that we discuss all the time as a publisher. And I'm sure researchers out there that are watching this are very familiar with the concept of open access, open science, open data. And we're really encouraging all researchers out there to publish their data and their methods and the protocols and everything, so that science can be shared and can be improved on by other researchers around the world like you. So especially in this case, it's very, very important. Right?
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point, is that, if you already have a sample and it's not really diverse, I think it's so important to report that in, for example, the table 1 demographics, just so that we're being very transparent about the sample makeup of the participants. And I think it's a really good, it's a good thing to be transparent, I think, as much as possible if that data is available.
Excellent, excellent. So let's hope people are listening to us and they can come forward with some amazing data that we can look at together in the next interview. So let's go back to then your area of study, right? Let's talk about women's brain, and we talk about hormonal changes in women, like during menopause. Let's talk about your findings. So what impact might those shift in hormones actually have on brain health and on Alzheimer's risk for women?
Yeah, so you mentioned menopause. It's a topic that a lot of people don't really know about, including women, the experience of menopause. And I think a lot of people, when they think about menopause, they associate it with end of fertility, but it's also has direct ties to brain health as well. So the ovaries communicate with the brain through the neuroendocrine system. So that's using sex hormones, especially estrogen. And so with the menopause transition, there are dynamic changes in levels of estrogen that are influencing the brain and brain health, and as well as behavioral symptoms and cognitive and neurological symptoms. And then after menopause, there's there's a decline in these levels of estrogen that are prevalent premenopause. And estrogen is a neuroprotective hormone. It's not only involved in reproductive function, but it's very much involved in brain health and cognitive health. It's involved in all parts of our body. So it's involved in bone health. It's involved in maintaining cardiovascular health. So it has a role almost in all systems of the body. And one thing that when we think about menopause is we think hot flashes. And so that's a vasomotor symptom that is prevalent for a majority of women who go through the menopause transition. But there are also neurological symptoms that are happening as well. And so this includes brain fog. This idea that you're not feeling as sharp as you felt before the transition. There's some women experience subjective cognitive decline. Others experience anxiety, depression. So there's a number of symptoms that a woman could potentially experience going through menopause. Not all women experience everything, and there are some women, who go through the transition, experience one symptom, others experience several other. So I think it's really important to be aware of the different symptoms that you might experience. So brain health is affected because the hormones, there's basically a lack of these sex hormones. There's lack of estrogen that is not available for the brain. And so the body is responding to that.
Right. And I know we take the menopause as kind of a benchmark, as you said, as the end of fertility and the kind of end of a chapter, let's say. And but we also can think about perimenopause. We can think about the years before perimenopause and menopause. And is the same, we're talking about, for example, bone density and kind of muscle mass and things like that, that after 30 or 40, it tends to degenerate in women. Just kind of you lose quite a bit of it. Is the same thing happening also at brain level? Are we seeing something that drastic happening up there as well, or is happening just later on in life?
Yeah, so that is, you've asked like a great question. It's an area of active research. So more research does need to be, I think there just needs to be more light that needs to be shed on this. So some women do experience subjective cognitive decline, but when they actually go to see a doctor to be clinically tested, they're actually performing normally. So it's this subjective experience that their cognitive function is declining. And there have been research that's been done that shows that, for example, the brain energy levels decrease during the menopause transition. So it's your brain's ability to basically use glucose it's not as effective as it was before. And so this might also experience your symptoms, these neurological symptoms that you're experiencing, such as brain fog. But what's really important to note is that although we don't know too much about it, it seems like from the research that I've read, at least, these symptoms don't persist post-menopause. So it really is during this transition into menopause where women are experiencing these dynamic fluctuations in estrogen, that they're experiencing these symptoms. But actually, once they're in post-menopause, their levels of, for example, their levels of cognitive health or tend to go back to almost baseline. So this is what I've read in the literature, but I think more research certainly needs to be done here.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, everything that was affecting a woman was down to hysteria, right? Connected to uterus, and that was it. You're sad hysteria, you're mad hysteria. So
I think yeah, for sure. And I just wanted to add to what you were saying. Like, I think a lot of women experience these symptoms, and they talk to maybe their spouses or their family members, or they even chat with their doctors, and they don't validate what they're experiencing, which is really unfortunate. I think, a lot of women tend. So I think maybe that's in part because the medical education when it comes to menopause is very little. Yeah, I just think it's really unfortunate because there's already a taboo surrounding talking about menopause, and then the fact that, yeah, just the fact that women have to experience this alone is really unfortunate, and yeah, it's something that we need to step away from.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And do you think, or have you seen many differences in this, how we talk about this subject between, women from different cultural backgrounds or ethnicities? Do you think there's like a lot of differences there, or is more or less
Mm.
the same everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I guess I can maybe give you some of my personal experience. So,
Of
like,
course.
I come from like a Hindu background, Sri Lankan culture, and so we don't talk about anything. Like, we didn't really talk about like puberty, like experiences of puberty. Menopause was not something that I was aware of until I actually started doing research. So,
Wow. Okay.
it's culturally like we didn't really talk about this, and I do think this is an experience that a lot of people that I've at least chatted with tend to mention as well. So there might be some cultures where people are maybe a bit more open to chatting about it, but I do think there's still like a prevalent association of shame attached to menopause, and I don't know why. Like maybe it's because yeah, people erroneously think that it's like linked to like the end uh, of fertility or whatnot. But I think it's just it's unfortunate how we see such an important and natural transition in a woman's life in such negative lens. So I think it's something that we need to be more open in terms of discussing about this and just yeah, like unveiling the shame surrounding this natural transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think that's also a barrier then in gathering the data that we need to have in terms of different uh, type of ethnicity and cultural backgrounds?
Hmm.
The fact that there is this sort of taboo, and not just
Hmm.
for post, but other things. Do you think there's an actual uh, barrier to gathering the data that could make the studies more relevant for everybody?
I think so. Yeah, I think you're less likely to talk about something if you're feeling potentially ashamed of it. So I think one thing that we can do as scientists, researchers, is just to yeah, just chat about it or very openly and without any judgment or stigma associated with it, um, and yeah, just be very open with it, and yeah.
Perfect. No, sorry,
Yeah.
I was just very curious because this affects, me and everybody that I know that is like
Yeah.
uh, having this or will be experiencing this. So it's very important to understand what's going on research wise. And I will go back to the fact of the communication with the public and how we can share the research with the general public to make them better understand what's going on.
Mm.
But we have also a question from the public, and also ties well with my next question. That was practical tips on how we can better deal with these changes in our brain. How we can avoid, having this. How we can support an healthy brain, basically.
Mhm,
Do you have any
mhm.
tips that we can share? It's exercise, something that we
Yeah.
can take on.
Absolutely. Exercise is a bit of a panacea when it comes to brain health and just health in general, in the sense that it promotes brain health. It reduces dementia risk. It is also really helpful for mental health.
Mhm.
It helps promote better sleep quality. So I think exercise is a really important thing that everyone should integrate in their lifestyle. One thing to note is that with exercise, actually, there are different types of exercise, and it's important to kind of find what works best for you. With women, for example, they tend to experience greater risk of osteoporosis after menopause, and that's, as I mentioned before, linked to estrogen being a protective hormone for bone health. And so post-menopause, when we don't have these same protective levels of estrogen, this could pose a greater risk. And so finding exercises that promote muscle mass, for example, or promote building of muscles is incredibly important.
Mhm.
So that could be like resistance training. But you know, as I mentioned, also there's also like with the menopause transition. It's often associated with like stress and anxiety, and so different types of exercises may be really helpful for that as well, such as like mindfulness exercises. Yoga
Mhm.
has been shown to be very beneficial for stress reduction. So I think trying different things that eventually work best for you, but that also is taking into consideration the natural changes that you're experiencing in the body is very important.
Mhm.
That being said, so with exercise, that's incredibly important. I would say with promoting brain health, there's also diet. There's also, you know, I would really focus on stress reduction as well. Um, Sleep hygiene is incredibly important as well, you know, especially women experiencing the menopause transition. If you're experiencing a hot flash, you're not going to be sleeping really well, especially at night.
Mhm.
So, you know, finding, but at the same time, you know, sleep is an important time where your brain is essentially clearing out the waste. So it's clearing out the waste, and so it's really important to have good quality sleep to ensure that your brain is functioning at an optimal level. So yeah, there's various different things I think that you can do at a sort of on a lifestyle level
Mhm.
to promote brain health. All that being said, I think it's really important to note that, you know, oftentimes when we think about promoting brain health, we think about it at an individual level. But I also think that, you know, we have to think about this in a systematic way as well. So for example, women who are going through menopause, they're often experiencing so much more in their lives that makes it harder to, for example, exercise. So they're
Yeah.
typically, you know, they typically have responsibilities related to caregiving. They're taking care of their children. They're taking care of their elderly parents. They often have
Yeah.
increased professional responsibilities. All this with experiencing the symptoms of menopause can make it an incredibly stressful time. And
Mhm.
you know, women often there's like this gender component, like gender roles and gender norms, that may make it harder for them to engage in these sort of lifestyle behavior choices. So, for example, women, yeah, as I mentioned, women often around the world tend to take on greater caregiving responsibilities. They tend to take on more of the emotional burden. So, you know, at the individual level, trying our best to address all these factors is really important, but also trying to, yeah, making sure that we have like a community that supports us and
Yeah.
allows us to engage in these behaviors is super important as well. You know, not just at the family level, but you know, workplaces, making sure that they're tending towards you know, women who are experiencing menopause. It might be tough to focus on your work when you're experiencing a hot flash. You know, so I think it's really important to not put all the responsibility on the individual, but sort of see it as sort of this community level approach to improving brain health for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a
Mhm.
question that's really well related to that, which is, should we be encouraging global brain health since childhood by teaching healthy habits? And this also in a
Yeah.
context of not accepting the fact that we should be on 100% all the time and that we should
Yeah.
take care of our brain, not just when it comes to the menopause, but,
Mm.
earlier on. We shouldn't just be
Yeah.
trying to patch things up at the end, but just habitually like start with good habits, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I'm incredibly grateful for my parents because they made sure that, you know, we exercised before we had fun. Before we played with our friends. So you know, when we were kids, we had to run 1 or 2 laps around the school track before we could actually say hi to our friends. And so they were quite disciplined about this. But now, as a grown adult, I'm incredibly grateful for the discipline that they instilled in me because it's allowed me to continue my exercise regimen, even if with a somewhat of a busy schedule. So I think it's such a great question especially when it comes in the context of Alzheimer's and dementia in general. So when we think about Alzheimer's, actually, we think that, you know, it's a disease that affects older adults above 60 years old. But the thing is, this is actually when symptoms, cognitive symptoms and behavioral symptoms are showing up. But actually, the disease is appearing up to 10 years before, so decades before potentially in the brain. It's just that you're not seeing it at this sort of cognitive symptom level. So you're functioning, you seem to be functioning okay, but there's something that's happening in the brain that's slowly starting to lead into a diagnosis of Alzheimer's much later in life. So and with diseases like Alzheimer's, there isn't actually a cure. The best approach is prevention, and prevention occurs as early as the viewer asked, childhood. So childhood is important because it's a great way to instill great habits. But you know, starting when, however old you are, just starting you know, where you are, and just implementing and integrating an exercise regimen is incredibly important for brain health and staving off dementia.
Okay, so it's never too early to start. So we need to start straight away, especially if we're women, to get into a nice habit of. So just to summarize, like exercise, depending, could be interval training or something, to get your blood pumping and get your muscle
Yeah.
up, and then good diet. So I would guess not over processed food, and try to eat healthy, as healthy you can
Yes.
eat, right?
Yeah, yeah. And with that, just finding what works again best for you. A diet might differ from person to person, but I think
Absolutely.
yeah, the general rules that you mentioned seem fit. Yeah.
And manage stress, so make sure that you take time for yourself and you don't get too stressed, and because all this could have an impact already down the line. And
Yeah.
and you said, so if you're a woman now, like in your 30s, 40s or 50s, you're thinking about these things, okay, I'm gonna start today, because you know, if this starts to appear in like 10 years, I don't want it to be as bad as it could be, you know.
Yeah.
Does it start with genetics as well? So is it something
Yeah.
that runs in the family,
Yeah,
possibly?
genetics is a huge component of developing certain conditions like Alzheimer's disease. So, for example, ApoE4. So there's a gene called the ApoE gene, and having the risk factor for this gene can increase the risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. And what's kind of interesting is that women with this genetic risk factor tend to have a much worse progression of the disease than men with the genetic risk factor. So
Right.
this is a very interesting example where risk factors, they're the same risk factor, but they're having very different effects to brain aging and Alzheimer's disease progression depending on your sex. So genetics is a very huge, plays a very huge role, for sure. Yeah.
Is it something you can test to see?
Yeah.
Is it something is
Yeah.
recommended?
I think it is something that you could test. It might differ country to country, and there's also it's not something that I'm too much of an expert on, but there is also genetic counseling as well, and these are experts who can help you navigate this as well. Another thing is having a family history of Alzheimer's. You're more likely to develop Alzheimer's if you have a family history. So there is a genetic risk factor, and you know, some people want to know this and others don't. It can be empowering, but it can also be debilitating. So I think part of it is knowing a little bit about who you are and how you think you'll maybe respond to knowing.
Because it's a bit difficult sometimes, especially I see that in Italy. Alzheimer's and this sort of diseases have just come to light, or to be better known, in the last 10 to 20 years. And in the past, somebody was just being defined as senile, right? So
Yeah,
it's difficult to know who in your family might have had Alzheimer, or was just, you know, just being
yeah,
person over 80 just behaving a certain way because they were over 80, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's why I was asking if there was some test, or if it was genetic,
yeah,
because sometimes the family
yeah,
history could be a bit
yeah,
unclear.
absolutely. Yeah, you definitely can. Yeah, so I also just want to give a huge caveat. Just because you have a risk factor for
Mhm.
Alzheimer's disease, or just because you have a family history of Alzheimer's disease, it does not guarantee that you will get Alzheimer's disease. It just increases your risk, but it doesn't mean that you're going to develop Alzheimer's disease. So it's very important to remember that. And yeah.
Okay, and
Mm,
there is from your studies, what you've seen, there
mm,
is like a higher chances to see these symptoms later on still in the year. So the majority of people would get it after uh, their 70 or 80s, or
mm.
have you seen from more studies that people can get it much earlier than that as well? Is there a trend or?
Yeah, so the typical form of Alzheimer's, it is in older adulthood, but there is an early I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name, but there is an early onset form of Alzheimer's
Okay.
disease where you can get it much younger, but it is
Mhm.
categorized grouped a little bit differently. But typically, it's when you're in your older adulthood that you develop this disease.
Oh, fab. And we have another question. So a lot of questions today. I'm
Okay.
trying to incorporate them in the conversation, but
Yeah, for sure.
this one I'm just going to read.
Okay.
So, do you know of any large studies, any large long-term studies monitoring women mid 40s with or without hormonal interventions? Is there a question
Mhm.
you're here's the longer question. Sorry. Thank you for this. Do you know of any large studies carrying out long-term monitoring of women after 40 years of age with or without hormonal intervention and influence of those pharmacological interventions on the risks towards AD development?
Mhm. I don't. That being said, there are, I think this is an active area of research, and so I'm sure that this is work that's actually like currently being conducted, but I personally don't know of any studies that have focused on this. It is a huge undertaking, as you can imagine, a study like this. So um, uh, I think right now there's a lot of focus on this type of work. So hopefully in the years to come, we'll learn a little bit more about this type of work.
Great, thank you. And thanks for all the questions, by the way. Very
Mhm.
active participants today. And
Mm.
just going back to your studies, what is the most fascinating thing you've discovered or you researched so far that is like keeping you hooked to this subject area?
Mm, I think one thing that really fascinates me is there's been several studies that have been published that seem to show that yeah, so women the sort of typical way that we tend to assess Alzheimer's disease, for example, is through these cognitive tests. It's not a surefire way, but it is a way to
Mhm.
see if women, for example, or men are experiencing symptoms of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. But
Mhm.
one thing that I've found incredibly fascinating is that women actually tend to perform a lot better than men on these cognitive tests, even when
Mhm.
they're showing similar levels of brain pathology as it relates to Alzheimer's disease. So I
Wow.
think this is a very interesting um, point to sort of delve into a little bit further because at this they're showing this sort of resilience despite having greater brain pathology. And why is that the case? I know that on the one hand, women do have a lifelong advantage when it comes to certain tests like verbal tests of verbal memory, and so that's clearly is persisting despite despite levels of brain pathology. But it also shows that the current test for assessing Alzheimer's disease might not be up to the mark when it comes to diagnosing women at a timely manner. So
Right.
we're catching men, but we're not actually catching women, and so
Because
this
perform
is
better.
a very exactly is a very
Wow.
clear example of making sure that diagnosis is tailored in a way that considers sex and gender.
Wow. Okay. That's really interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
disadvantage that becomes a disadvantage
Yeah,
when it comes to the testing. Oh man,
in a way, yeah, exactly, yeah,
we need
yeah,
to find better testing.
yeah.
Yeah, but that all comes down to whoever created the test and for whom, and now the difference are coming out, and so things need to be adjusted.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, that's great. And, I'm
Mm.
learning so much there. I'm sure all our
Yeah.
listeners are as well. And if you have
Mm.
any other questions, please drop them in the chat. I just wanted to go back very quickly to kind of the communication of findings and of your research, obviously, but also in general of all this very precious information to the population out there. And we're talking about women, and we're talking about diverse ethnicities and cultural backgrounds, to also remove the stigma around some of these topics. I don't know, I just want to chat with you. We're doing this interview now, and I think it's very
Mm.
useful for people out there. But science communication is very important in general in medicine. Is
Mhm.
that something you are passionate about, you've seen developing across your field as well, or I don't know?
When it comes to science communication, you mean? Or
Yes, science
the
communication. So
yeah,
sharing this
yeah,
type of scientific information with
yeah,
a public that doesn't have a medical background, and so it's a
yeah,
bit difficult to get
yeah.
across. Uh,
I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely important to, as scientists, to engage in science communication, in part because our funding is supported by taxpayers' dollars. And so we owe it to the public to
mhm,
communicate our findings in a way that is accessible and understandable. Yeah, there's also, I think there my personal perspective is also that there needs to be more training that needs to be done
mm,
for scientists because, for example, as I was doing my PhD, my focus was on publishing papers, but
yeah.
there wasn't any formal training on science communication. It's been something that I've kind of just done, but learning along the way, and so that can also be quite paralyzing, especially when you're
Yeah.
talking about very important topics when it comes to women's health, when it comes to all these are brain health, when it comes to Alzheimer's disease. And so it's sometimes, left me paralyzed a little bit because, I want to make sure that I'm communicating in a responsible way. And
Mhm.
so I think my personal perspective is that more needs to be done in terms of training researchers and scientists to communicate in a way that is accessible, that's also culturally sensitive as well, because, I'm mentioning all these lifestyle choices, but it might not be sensitive culturally. It might apply to certain groups. And so I think just making sure that we're seeing these changes at different levels. It's not just about it's not just about expanding diverse recruitment, but it's about applying intersectional analyses when it comes to the statistical analyses that we're applying, but it's also applying those findings to these diverse cohorts of groups that we're trying to understand more about as well.
And it's absolutely right. And I think there's a big question mark on the fact that, should researchers be given training about it? Yes, of course, they should get some training, but at the
Mm.
same time, researchers are overworked also when it comes
Yeah,
to all the things they need to do nowadays. They need to do research, they
yeah,
need to publish as much as possible, they need to go to conferences, and now they also have to create a message that is clear for the rest of the population, for the public. So it's a lot
yeah,
of work, and I'm
absolutely.
interested to see how it will evolve. But definitely, some training or more services in this area should be provided for sure.
Mm. Mhm.
So thank you, because this is one, what we're doing now is a step towards that, I hope, and that we
I hope
can
so
share
too.
this information.
Yeah.
And uh, let's, one other question connected to empowering women in research, since we're talking about
Mm.
women. What would you say women scientists and students who are interested in this field, any advice on navigating a career that intersects biology, neuroscience, and gender studies? Do you have any tips?
Yeah,
Or
I didn't uh I didn't uh, go through my sort of research training with the focus of like biology, gender studies, and neuroscience. I think my strategy has been just following my interest, and it happens
Mhm.
to be these disciplines that you mentioned. And so I think that's worked really well for me. It's just to follow what's interesting and trying to understand why we see certain things. And I think that naturally leads you to explore different disciplines and try to merge different disciplines together.
Mhm.
Yeah, for women scientists, I think, I personally getting into academia, I experienced a lot of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I think
Yep.
it's a lot of thing. It's something that a lot of women experience a lot more than men, and it can be quite crippling. Especially when you're trying to perform well and you have feelings of self doubt that it can be paralyzing. And I think part of that, when I thought about this as to why, I think a lot of it has to do with me being a first generation student and not really knowing these unspoken rules of academia. And that can be incredibly tough when you're navigating something and you don't really know that there's certain ways of doing things or
Yep.
certain sort of implicit rules. And so this can be especially tough for people who are new to academia.
Mhm.
But that being said, I've been incredibly lucky with having a wonderful support network of mentors. So my current advisor, my previous advisor, they've been incredibly gracious with their time in terms of explaining these like rules very
Mhm.
explicitly to me so that I understand what's going on. And so I wouldn't lose hope. I just my advice is to find a community of people that will support you and that will uplift you. I think that's really helped me, and just follow your passion and your interest, and I think that will lead you to great places.
Lovely, lovely. That's absolutely right. Find your people, the ones that will support you no matter what. So yeah,
100%.
excellent advice. Um, so one final question. So where do you think this field is heading the next 5 to 10 years, particularly when it comes to personalized healthcare for women?
I think I'm hoping. I mean, it seems that it's very clear based on the active research that's being done, but I think there will be a lot more research that's done on understanding female-specific experiences and transitions or reproductive stages. For example, puberty, pregnancy,
Mhm.
menopause, how all these factors influence brain health. So I'm hoping there will be a lot more research on that. I'm hoping there will be a lot more research on intersectionality and how different groups may experience risk or of disease in different ways, and how we can just approach um, specialized interventions in a way that considers an individual holistically.
Mm.
So I'm hoping that we're moving more in the direction of personalized care that considers the individual's background, that considers their life experiences, and then also takes into account their reproductive history, as well as their experiences through womanhood in the case of my research.
Mhm, mhm. No, that's great. And do you think AI will help out with that? Will
I
make
think
things
so.
easier and faster?
I think it's already helping.
Great.
So I for sure I think we're going to find really creative ways to develop tools to basically hopefully predict, people who might be at greater risk of developing a certain disease earlier on, so that we can approach it through a preventive and early intervention approach.
Lovely. And it will
Mm,
all benefit from this discovery. So let's hope
I think
that
so.
that
Yeah.
happens and
Yeah.
sooner rather than later. But thank you so much, Sivanya. This was great. I think I had a lot of fun and I think I learned a lot. And thank you so much for explaining everything so clearly. And anything else that you would like to add that we might have left out or any
Um,
last
I
words?
don't I don't think so. I mean, feel free to contact me if you have any other questions afterwards. It's been so lovely to chat with you as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in and for your questions. We are coming back with the next episode of People in Science Live on Thursday, 24th of April, where I'll be interviewing Dr. Benjamin Gardner, expert in the psychology of habitual behavior. So we'll talk about habits and how they are important for us and also for our environment. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting. But thank you again, Sivania, and to you all, see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.